It's good that you're joining me. I appreciate that. And since today is Father's Day, our talk is going to revolve around that topic. I have a little hesitancy on some of the material that I'm going to cover today. I'll admit that. I feel like, sort of like on TV, sometimes they'll have this viewer discretion advised warning that the content may not be suitable for some viewers. The idea is that some of the stats and information that I've dug up isn't necessarily common knowledge, and you may not like it. Maybe it'll offend you. Certainly not done to do that, and my wife describes it as it's gloomy. So with that said, and it'll be different. It won't be sort of the typical Bible talk. It's more about laying out where things are at in our culture and in fathering and some of the attitudes and some of the things that maybe that are true that we just don't know about. Now, I know that myself, I guess if I could go back, maybe put it this way, if I could go back and share some advice with my younger self, I'd have some things, good information that I've learned over the years to share with my younger self, especially as it pertains to fathering. That, as I saw on one show this guy talking, and he was like, you get to a certain age and you reflect on the job you did as a father, your role as a father, and how you did that. As we get older, we realize, and many of us realize, it's probably the most important job that we have ever undertaken, and that will be the one that will be most meaningful to us as we age and sort of move on closer to death and into those last stages of our lives. That'll be less about the money that we made or the things that we've accumulated. It'll be about those relationships. And so for many of us, we wish we could go back and relive some of the things knowing what we know now. And of course, there are others, you're just in the middle of it, and some yet to start. And there was a fella who had wrote into a column that I think the advice is certain reflective of a certain segment of our population, that is sort of with at least certain segment, it's fairly mainstream. And this guy writes into, it's called, this column called Feminist Advice Friday. And he says he's about to become a dad, and he's asking for parenting advice. And he says, I've read all the parenting books, and I know there are some things that dads just tend to do poorly. And so his question was, so what do you think I should know? What are the things I should pay attention to? And the writer, Zon Villanines, if I'm saying her name right, she begins by sort of saying, well, parenting at the beginning is, yes, it's really difficult, but it gets easier. And then she goes on and she lists 10 things for him to know. And the first things that she highlighted was that the way you treat your partner in the postpartum period is going to affect her for the rest of her life. Whoa, that's pretty heavy. And part of me goes, is that really true? And thinking, I've never heard anybody talk about that. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but that seems pretty significant. Number 2, know that parenting is a skill. It certainly is. And then she goes on to say, and most men don't understand this, and so they just go on and make the same mistakes their parents did. I know some men that would disagree with that. But sure, there's some truth in that. Number 3, know that society has indoctrinated you to do things the lazy way. What do you think of that, guys? Number 4, kids need a schedule. Yes, they do. And she goes on to say, and many men struggle with this because they're only about themselves. And then she goes on, number 5, don't automatically reject every parenting strategy your partner wants to try. Good advice. Number 6, know that even when things look equal, they're not. And then she talks about why that is. One is, she says that first, after a lifetime of patriarchal conditioning, much of the work women do is invisible to you. Guess if it's invisible, we, as men, what can we say to that? Her second reason is that your wife, she goes, your wife gave birth to your child risking her life, changing her body and her health, and doing more dishes hardly renders things equal. And then she says, the third follow-up, she says, society will forever treat your partner worse because she's a mother. And then she goes on to list how she will suffer and be judged forever. And I have to admit, I'm like, really? Maybe there is a segment of population, so that speaks to maybe this person's experience. And is that how it is out there for women now? That you're judged because you decided to be a mother? And I know in some ways, if mothers decide to be a mother rather than have a career, there are people who judge that, but is it that bad? And then she goes on to suggest that you seek advice early. Good idea. Number 8, understand that you will likely come to parenting with a deficit of skills, men, while women have been practicing from day one. What do you think of that advice? It certainly says something about her perspective. Number 9, don't undermine your partner. That's good advice. And number 10, although I'm wondering what she's doing to this male. And number 10, if parenting is easy for you, it means you're not doing enough of it, and your partner is probably struggling. So what do you think of her feminist advice? And if that is sort of the flavor of our society, about men, about fathering, what does it say? And where does that place you as a man, and where does that place you as a woman, as a mother? It seems that she assumes that fathering is really an extension of mothering, right? Watch your wife learn how to do it. She's been doing it since day one. Is fathering just mothering in a male body? Are mothers the ideal parent and fathers just wannabes? Or are they almost, you might say, two different skill sets, two different approaches? And is one superior to the other, or they both have their strengths and perhaps weaknesses? So I did a deep dive into all kinds of articles and spent hours and hours reading articles and studies and stats. And what did I find out? This is where it gets uncomfortable. And of course, if you want to see the impact that fathering has as opposed to mothering, the easiest way to study that is to compare single parent homes, male, where in one set where there's the fathers are the single parent and where mothers are the single parent, and compare them. Or compare single mother homes where there's no father to, you could also say, in homes where there's two parents, a father and a mother, to see, do fathers make a difference? Are single mothers' homes better off because of who guys are? Or what do the stats say? Well, Heritage Scholars reported that a 10% increase of children living in single-parent homes led typically to a 17% increase in juvenile crime. That the rate of violent teenage crime corresponds with the number of families abandoned by their father. A university that I know a couple of my brothers went to, Brandon University in Manitoba, brandu.ca, they had this article that was produced at one time where they compared concentrations of single mother families to concentrations of single father families. And so when you had a concentration of single mother families, what they found was that they're all living sort of close together, these single mothers with their families, youth crime increased. When they compared it to what happens with father-led families, there was near zero effect, that they were basically the same as the effect of two-parent families. The Canadian Children's Rights Council reports that children who grew up fatherless are 8 times more likely to go to prison, 5 times more likely to commit suicide, 20 times more likely to have behavior problems. Allforkids.org reports that 85% of youth in prison have absent fathers. Patrick Fagan and Dorothy Hanks in The Child Abuse Crisis, the Disintegration of Marriage, Family in the American Community, writes that contrary to public perception, research shows that the most likely physical abuser of a young child will be that child's mother, not a male in the household. The National Fatherhood Initiative, and these are stats out of the U.S. Bureau of Census, the FBI, report that father deprivation is a more reliable predictor of criminal activity than race, environment, and poverty. That father-deprived children are 72% of all teenage murderers, 60% of rapists, 70% of kids incarcerated. They're twice as likely to quit school. They're 11 times more likely to be violent. That 3 out of 4 of teen suicides are from homes where the father is absent. 80% of the adolescents in psychiatric hospitals, father's absent. And 90% of the runaways, which often go on to live on the streets, where they're then become exposed to many dangerous things, including sexual predation. The Institute for the Study of Civil Society out of the UK, so looking at across the pond, as we say, what's going on there, they report that children who grew up fatherless are 8 times more likely to go to prison, 5 times more likely to commit suicide, 20 times more likely to have behavioral problems, 20 times more likely to become rapists, 32 times more likely to become runaways, 10 times more likely to be abused chemical and substances, 9 times more likely to drop out of high school, and 1/10 as likely to get an A in school. And I could go on. And we recognize, of course, there are dads who don't show up. There are dads who don't help out financially. There are dads who do harm. And of course, there are dads who are away because of war, because of their jobs, because of things that they don't control. There's a lot of things that marital breakdown. There's all kinds of reasons that it gets difficult. Some perhaps within men's control, sometimes not within men's control, and a lot of times outside maybe the mother's control. But the Children's Rights Council identified fatherlessness, and so I want to bring this to, they identified fatherlessness as one of the greatest social problems in Canada. And I wonder, does that have anything to do with how men are treated in the court system? How they are rated as, useless or no good, or they don't parent like a woman, so then they're a problem, or some of these other attitudes. Does that play into this at all? Does that feed that men going their own way movement? And so I'm not here to give all the answers, but just to raise some questions. And they say that, what do you think of this? They say that one of the greatest social problems is fatherlessness in Canada. And they quote this woman, Penelope Leach, in her book, Children First, who asks this question. She says, why is it socially reprehensible for a man to leave a baby fatherless? Why is it socially reprehensible for a man to leave a baby fatherless? Right? We have a name for them, right? Deadbeat dads. But then she says, but why then is it courageous, even admirable, for a woman to have a baby whom she knows will be fatherless? Why would she get involved with a man who is not ready to be a father? And I have so much more, but I am trying to do these talks as a summary, really. And so I'll shorten it to say this, that in Canada, our census reports in 2022 that most children under the age of 17 belong to families in which the parents are married, 73%. A significant portion of children, though, belong to lone parent families, 17%, of which, of the 17, 15% are with single mothers and 2% with single fathers. In Ontario, in 2022, there is almost 750,000 children in lone parent families, 749,769. And so what that sort of looks like in Canada, there's almost 1 in 5 children living in a lone parent family. In the US, the numbers get worse. 23 million children live in single parent families, which means about 1 in every 3 kids across America. That in 2019, the US had the highest rate of children living in single parent households in the world. Which puts a lot of children at risk if the father is not involved. And that's a key piece in all of this, is having the father involved. In an article by Dick Feeman, and there's a couple of other guys who wrote this, and it was called Child Custody or Child Abuse. They wrote this for the Victoria Times. They stated this: father deprivation is a serious form of child abuse that is institutionalized and entrenched within our legal system. Powerful sexist people have a vested interest in diminishing the role of men, especially their role as fathers. Research proves that children thrive with the active and meaningful participation of both biological parents. And that is true for post-divorce families as well. Okay. So whether married or divorced, what they're saying is, as much as possible, right, both parents be involved. Be involved. Your children will thrive if you do so. The Bible doesn't say a lot specifically on this topic, but what in Ephesians chapter 6, we read that children are called to honor, in verse 2, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on earth. And then it says, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. And I just wanted to focus in on that first part, the honoring. Does our society honor men? Fathers, for the job they do, or because they don't do it exactly like women, like their mothers, somehow it's wrong or it's bad, just inherently. Now that isn't to say that all of us, male or female, right, mothers and fathers, don't have something to learn, and that we don't learn, and that we could use advice from others as we parent, of course. I hope we understand that. But I think what we want to do, what Paul is saying, and I agree with him, that if we don't honor men, we see there's a cost to society. There's a cost to the children. Enormous cost to society. And so today I want to end by honoring and calling us to honor fathers. That fathers need to know, fathers, you matter. You're not the same as a mother, and that's okay, and that's a good thing. That fathers, for your children, you're indispensable. You're indispensable for the well-being of your children. And so be as involved as you can. Develop your parenting skills. Work things out with their mothers. Especially if you're divorced, separated, so on, so that you can be involved in the lives of your children. But whether we are male or female, mother or father. Let us honor our fathers and our mothers, and to treat them with the respect, with the honor that they are due. Thank you for listening.